Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Unit 6, Insights about Polar Regions and Sea Level Rise. At the end of this lecture, students will be able to identify polar regions and their habitat, explain the difference between melting land and sea ice, list the various factors that cause sea levels to rise, and discuss why polar regions matter for global warming. As per usual, the first question that we ask ourselves, the what question. What are the polar regions? The polar regions surround the Earth's north and south poles, and these are the various areas around the world. The area around the North Pole is called the Arctic. The area around the South Pole is called the Antarctic. These regions have unique climates. As you can see on the screen, on the left, the Antarctic region is in the circle, and on the right, you have the Arctic region to the north. In the summer, the average temperature at the North Pole is 0 degrees Celsius. In the winter, the average temperature drops to minus 40 degrees Celsius. The South Pole is even colder. The average temperature in the summer is minus 28 on average, and in the winter, it's minus 60 degrees Celsius. The diverse indigenous communities in these regions have developed various cultural practices that help them to live off the land. These include ways of hunting, fishing, and making clothing in extreme weather conditions. Now, there are various landforms in these regions, just like any other region. You have deserts, glaciers, ice sheets, and ice caps. Melting land and sea ice. Know the difference. What's the difference between the two? As temperatures rise, glaciers and other Arctic landforms melt faster than they accumulate new snow. This is what is known as land melting. While sea ice is frozen water that forms, expands, and melts in the ocean. Why is sea level rising? Since the early 1990s, global mean sea level has risen about 8 centimeters. This is because of several factors. Several factors such as thermal expansion. As the ocean warms in response to climate change, seawater expands, and as a result, sea level rises. There's also warming. The average global temperature has increased by about 1 degree Celsius over the last 150 years. This is largely because of greenhouse gases being emitted into the atmosphere. And you also have ice. The ice sheets that cover various areas such as Greenland and Antarctica hold about 99% of Earth's fresh water, with the potential to raise sea level dramatically. And we all know that this happens when there is melting of the polar ice caps. Polar regions. Let's talk about polar regions. Global warming affects the polar regions more than other parts of the world. In the past 30 years, temperatures in the Arctic have risen about twice as much as the average temperatures on Earth. Temperatures are rising so quickly that the Arctic could have no summer sea ice by 2035. In Antarctica, similar changes are happening. Ice sheets are melting, even in the coldest regions. Ice acts as a protective cover over the Earth and our oceans. These bright white spots reflect excess heat back into space and keep the planet cooler. These changes are happening quickly because of what we call feedback loops. A feedback loop happens when some of the output of a system comes back into the system as input. When sea ice melts in polar regions, water is exposed. The water is darker than the ice, so it absorbs more heat. Water also reflects less light than ice. The extra heat absorbed by the water causes even more ice to melt. This feedback loop means the Arctic is warming faster than it would otherwise. Feedback loops that include melting ice are causing rapid climatic changes in polar regions, and these climatic changes lead to the loss of habitat, disruption of food supply chains, death and destruction, and polar ice caps to melt. These are some pictures that are showing the various effects of when polar ice caps melt. We're seeing where different organisms and fauna and flora are either going extinct or having to shift from their habitats because they're losing their homes due to the rapid climatic changes that are occurring. There's a picture of a polar bear on the screen, and we're seeing where the polar bear is in a densely populated area with humans. However, as we all know, that's not the natural habitat for a polar bear. And so due to the loss of its habitat, it now has to migrate to another area in order to try to find food and a home. We also have the melting of the polar ice cap, as was mentioned earlier. So what is the data showing? Because in order to come up with strategic approaches to combat the effects of climate change, we need to have scientific driven data. On the screen, you're seeing a beautiful graph. Now, research based on satellite data from NASA, or what we call the National Aeronautics Space Administration, indicates that between 2002 and 2023, there has been significant loss of ice sheet mass in areas such as Antarctica and Greenland. Antarctica is losing ice mass at an average rate of about 150 billion tons per year, while Greenland is losing even more ice sheet mass. It's losing 270 billion tons per year, which is only adding to sea level rise. And this also poses a challenge to various small islands. Since the start of the satellite era in 1979, the extent of ice covering the Arctic Ocean at the end of summer has shrunk by more than 40%. Since 1967, spring snow cover has shrunk by 1.4% per decade in April, 4.1% per decade in May, and 12.9% per decade in June. Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen. That is the end of my presentation. If you do have any questions, you can email them to me at dainaregla@gmail.com. And our next stop on this exciting journey is Unit 10, Climate Business Management. See you then, ladies and gentlemen.